When you are a small army trying to influence a huge and disparate population, what I always tell people is start a podcast, right? This is such a potent tool for amplifying your voice at this time.
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Michael Graglia. Mike is the founder and CEO of Cure SYNGAP1, a nonprofit accelerating research into SYNGAP1-related disorder to bring therapies to children like his son, Tony, who was diagnosed in 2018. Now, before we dive in, here are a few things that I think you should know about today's guest. First, Mike is a leader driven by personal purpose and urgency. After Tony's diagnosis, he didn't just enter the rare disease world as a parent, he helped build an organization focused on accelerating therapies, supporting families, and pushing research forward at a time frame that matters for children like his son. There's an urgency to this. Second, he's turned that personal mission into real momentum. Under Mike's leadership, the organization has committed more than $6.2 million to research and helped grow a global, family-led movement with sister organizations in the UK, Europe, Australia, and Latin America. He inspires families and leaders in the rare disease community, showing how personal stakes can drive extraordinary leadership. And third, Mike brings an unusually broad background to this work because before founding Cure SYNGAP1, he built a career across public policy, international development, and strategy with roles at the Gates Foundation, the Emerson Collective, New America, BCG, and the World Bank Group, along with earlier service in Zimbabwe and the Peace Corps in Namibia. He holds an MBA from Columbia, an MA from Johns Hopkins SAIS, supported by the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship, and a BS in math from Gonzaga. Mike, you have been called many things: a visionary advocate, a strategist for rare disease research, a Paul and Daisy Soros Fellow, a Bronfman Fellow, a relentless champion for SYNGAP1 families, a dad, of course. Well, today we're proud to call you a chief influencer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
I'm glad that we got introduced. I mean, the work that you're doing is getting recognized globally. It's getting recognized nationally. I heard about you from our friends over at Milken. And just to start off, for listeners who may be new to SYNGAP1 related disorder, they may have never heard of it before. What impact are you trying to create in the world? Who do you have to influence to make that happen when you're dealing with a rare disease that a lot of folks, unfortunately, haven't even heard of?
Right. So I think what impact and who do I have to influence are two important questions. The mission is to get a cure for SYNGAP1. SYNGAP1 is one of these rare genetic diseases that, individually are rare, but together they affect millions of people in the United States. And SYNGAP is a combination of autism, epilepsy, intellectual disability. Any one of those three things is bad together in one poor little kid. It's just terrible. Compounded by disordered sleep, GI. These kids are very medically complex. They're on drugs from a very early age. And the parents are generally just endlessly running around from doctor to doctor. And they live a long time. Our oldest patient is about to turn 70. So it's a lifelong disability that impacts the patient and the family. So the impact I'm trying to create in the world is to make a medicine for this disease, right? This is possible with science today. This is down the middle possible with science today, but it hasn't happened for a variety of reasons. And the impact we're trying to push is to get industry to make this medicine and make it available to our patients. So that's easy. The hard question is your question: who do we have to influence? We have to influence academics to work on this disease. We have to influence clinicians to treat these kids and better understand the disease. We have to influence companies to invest their time and talent into this. We have to influence investors to put money into those companies to do it. And we have to influence parents to not give up hope. Yeah. Because this disease is just, it really taxes the family. And I have families who are fighting and are helping and are doing what they can. And I have families who are just barely hanging on and struggling to take care of these kids. And despair is a very real problem, right? And so I'm trying to influence all of those people to work together with us to drive forward to get this medicine that we know how to make into these humans that we know have the disease. It shouldn't be this hard, but everything in rare disease is helps you see all the many gaps in our healthcare system.
Yeah. And my understanding is that when your son Tony was diagnosed, there was no real roadmap. How did you realize what the community needed most that didn't yet exist and what to prioritize, how to plug it?
I don't want to pretend I have made no mistakes. Tony is 12. He was diagnosed when he was 4. It's been 8 years. We've had a lot of iteration. But I think when I started, there was a handful of rare diseases that people knew about. Angelman syndrome, Rett syndrome, Dravet syndrome, or the big 3. All of those end in syndrome because Dr. Angelman, Dr. Rett, and Dr. Dravet saw these kids who looked the same and said, these kids have the same disease. And then later we figured out, oh, Dravet is caused by SEM1A. Rett is caused by MECP2. I can never remember what Angelman's caused by. But you had the syndrome and then you had the gene, and then we sorted it out by going after the gene. When you start hearing about diseases that are really named after bad license plates, right? SYNGAP1, KCNT1, SCN2A, I can go on. What happened there is we found the gene, and then we found the humans later who had disorders in that gene and looked the same. And then we said, okay, we're going to call this disease after the gene. So Dravet syndrome, which is one of the OGs, one of the big diseases, when we were diagnosed, we were told, well, what you want to do is do what Dravet did. So I went to a Dravet conference, and I went and I met with the Dravet leadership, and I went to a big epilepsy conference, and I looked at what Dravet was doing, and they had a full-blown advocacy group. And people in the space will say, Dravet is a huge disease, a lot of support, a lot of money. And I met a mom, a wonderful mom named Marianne Meskis and some of her colleagues. And she and 4 moms, I want to say, I'm going to get this wrong, but more than 12 years ago, might have been 18. I don't remember. Their kids were diagnosed and they were running around a conference, and they were where I was. And I said, okay, I want to do what Dravet did. What's Dravet doing? Let's do it. Why is no one doing this? And really, Cure SYNGAP1 started as me saying, what did Dravet do and how do we do it? And then, once you show up in this space, there's so few people doing this work and there's so few resources. But once you show up, you find your people, you find the other patient advocates, and we all understand what each other is facing, and we help each other when we give each other advice. I still copy what Marianne Meskis is doing, and a lot of people now copy what I'm doing, and that's fine. That's because we all have different diseases and kids we're trying to help.
You talk about copying what others are doing, getting inspired by them. But there's some things you're doing that I would say others, you didn't copy. You kind of innovated on yourself. So a lesson we learned from 130 plus chief influencers is you have to learn the lingo, right? Just like you can rattle off these syndromes and talk about the specific genes that are in, when you show up, you have that credibility because you didn't know that stuff, but you decided to lean it and to learn all this complicated, language, right? These acronyms, et cetera. Well, when it comes to like the branding, marketing side of things, you have also leaned in. You have to kind of learn the lingo of platforms. And one of the things that you've done is you've created a video podcast. And that's not something we see from every rare disease organization. My understanding is that it was your wife who pushed you toward video because she thought people needed time to get to know you. And I wonder if you could kind of talk about that story when you decided to take this knowledge and take this passion and say, I'm going to use the power of my personal brand, my personal influence. I'm going to try to get this message out there. Can you share a little bit more about that journey with us?
Sure. I don't think I had a personal brand, to be clear, when I started this. I was just a guy who had done some stuff, and my kid got sick, and we started the patient advocacy group. And very quickly, when you start a patient advocacy group, you're getting pulled in 2 directions. You're dealing with a lot of family members of all these different kids, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different education levels, have been told different things by clinicians, and they're coming at you with a million questions. And you could spend your entire life just trying to help all the families. But you're also getting pulled in this group of other patient advocacy leaders and scientists who will talk to you, clinicians, and you're like, oh, we need to do this. We need to do this. We need to do this. And it's a real time challenge. So the specific example there's a wonderful company here in San Francisco called Citizen Health. And they built a platform whereby they built it for cancer, but they grew it to rare disease. whereby patients can, with a cancer or a rare disease, can sign up. They collect all your medical records. Now they have a cool little AI in there that helps you interrogate them. But it's super helpful to have those medical records. And then they can let researchers at those medical records de-identify it and learn about the disease.
Sure.
So that kind of speed for rare disease is really important. So I was totally impressed by Citizen, and I started working with them. And I needed to recruit all my families to sign up for Citizen. But who is this guy, Mike? He just got diagnosed. My kid's 10, his kid's 4. Why is he telling me what to do? And I had a couple of volunteers helping me, Virginia and Peter, and we would call families, we would send them emails, Facebook Messenger, and I would come home sometime and be like, I'm so mad. Why won't people do this? This is how we help. This is how we put SYNGAP on the map. This is how we make progress. And my wife looked at me one day and she said, she's the smart one. And she said, you know, I know this is hard for you to hear, but a lot of people think you're a jerk. Like, you're kind of pushy. You know, I think she might have used stronger language, honestly. And she's like, you know, you gotta let people get to know you. That's what she said. She didn't say, she said, maybe you should do some videos. Maybe you should let people see how much you really care and why this matters. So my wife says something, I normally do it. So I started Googling videos, YouTube, how do I do videos? I don't even know why I was Googling that. And then I was like, oh, there's a thing called a video podcast. And that just immediately made sense to me, because then you don't worry about distribution, right? People can sign up, they can get other ones. Oh, well, let's try this. And we had a small board back then, and I went to the board and I was like, hey, I'm gonna do a video podcast about Citizen and about SYNGAP. And they were just like, no, this is such a bad idea. Like, you're gonna annoy a lot of people. You on an open mic is just a bad idea, Mike. And I'm like, okay, you're probably right, but let's try it. Like, if it's terrible, we'll just delete them and pretend it never happened. And I put out the video podcast. These are all online. These are all still, you can go listen to. And people listened, and people replied, and people started signing up. And people, after a couple of weeks, people were like, Mike, where's episode 3? You know, it was like, is this supposed to be weekly? Mike, get to it. Yes, I was meeting my goal of getting people to do Citizen. But what I was really doing was sending out a news brief to these families all over America, all over the world, actually, who have this ultra rare disease and don't know what's going on. And I was giving them that information, and it's become such a powerful tool for activating our community, for building our community, for getting people to find it, and for sharing precious information. So that's kind of the short version of now it's called the Cure SYNGAP1 podcast. We used to call it SYNGAP10 because the goal was to keep it at 10 minutes. For a while there, I kind of fell off the wagon. They got really long. And then now, you know, LinkedIn and other platforms will only let you post videos up to 10 minutes. So I'm back to the 10.
Closer branding to the organization too. So I like that change. Okay. Why did you trust your instinct though, when you could have just listened to the board and go, I'm not going to do that? Like, what was it? There's that voice that tells us to do something. And then there's so many people who tell us to not listen to the voice that you did it. Maybe it was your wife's voice, was the voice that you listened to, but just would love to hear that, because others I know, other leaders sometimes have an idea to do something, and other people around them, whether it's their comms people or their board or their spouse, say like, I don't think you should do that. And it's kind of easy to just not act, but you did. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. My wife has good ideas, and I am a fan of efficiency and iteration. I think it's important to try. And if it's a mistake, you move on.
Yeah.
But if you don't try, you never know. And so, you know, I was like, what, you know, like I said in the story, I said to the board, let's just do 2 of them. If it's terrible, it's on me. I don't care.
Yeah.
And let's move on. And so I don't think it was some deep well of confidence. I was looking at a critical need, which was getting people to trust me and to take action. And I realized very quickly, even then, I mean, right now I have 1,700 patients worldwide that I know about, 500 of whom are in the US. Then I had maybe 100, maybe 200 in the US, right? And I was already overwhelmed. I'm like, how am I going to talk to all these people?
Yeah.
Do I have to really call every single one of these people and get them to sign up for this? Is crazy.
Yeah.
And just the beauty and the efficiency of recording it once and being able to send the video out and getting people to understand why this was so important. Because in fairness, you're not trained for rare disease. You're trained for disease. I have a disease. I go to the doctor, I get medicine. Everything's fine. Rare disease, I go to the doctor. Doctor has no clue what I've got.
Yeah.
If I've been lucky enough to be diagnosed, and there's no medicine. And they're like, well, good luck, go home, maybe try the internet. When the doctors are sending you to the internet, you know you're in trouble, right? So it was just it wasn't deep confidence as much as a willingness to try in the face of a very serious problem, which was activating and supporting patients.
Like when the doctors are sending you to the internet, you're in trouble because they always tell you not to go to the internet.
Exactly.
You've been doing this for a while now, and I would love for you to share some of the things that you've learned about the power of having a platform like a video podcast, how you can build community that way. Tell us what you learned. How long have you been doing it exactly? How many episodes you got out there? And then, what have you learned from doing this?
Yeah, I've been doing it for 5 years. I just hit episode 200, so now I think I'm going to record 205 today, which I'll put out tomorrow. But I'm averaging about 40 a year, which tells you I'm a little inconsistent, but it's okay. So I just pump them out, right? And for me, it's a way of saying, guys, this is what's important now. And when we have a particular recruiting campaign, I talk about that. When we have an exciting paper, I talk about that. When there's industry developments, I talk about that. But it's a powerful platform. Like I really started it, and the ethos of it is very much Mike talking to the families.
Yeah.
But I've walked into companies and they're like, oh yeah, we all listen to it. And then one company who has us on their pipeline had some good information, good news come out, and I talked about it. And luckily, a long time ago, I got an MBA, so I used the correct words. But I got a call the next day. Hey, our investment relations department talked to you and or heard your podcast. They just want to make sure you're clear on this point. They weren't correcting me. They were just like, Mike should talk about it. And I was like, why do they care about what this guy is saying on a rare disease pod? So companies are listening to it. Other rare disease groups are listening to it because they're trying to copy us. And that's great. I think we should all copy. But again, it's all about the credibility and the trust with the patients, right? At the end of the day, what I'm doing is I'm trying to get companies to make a brand new medicine. And that only matters if families put it in their kids, right? Brand new medicine, first in human. Why on earth would people put that in a medically fragile child? Well, because it could reduce their symptoms and improve the rest of their lives and their families' lives.
Yeah.
But it's still a big leap. And so what really matters is having trust and connection with the families. And you can't expect someone to get a phone call from a stranger and be like, oh yeah, which hospital do I go to subject my child to this thing that I don't understand? That's crazy. So it's really, I view this as part of my job of constantly building the relationship and the rapport and the trust while also sharing the knowledge, right? Yeah. Helping people understand these different concepts that will be used in these medicines so that when it is go time, we can move quickly. And I think time and again, I have met families at conferences. I have gone to people's homes and I have walked in with, always nervous to meet someone for the first time and make sure we have a good interaction. And a few times they've just been like, Mike, I just feel like I know you. Like I have watched so many of your podcasts and being welcomed in with that warmth.
Yeah.
When it wasn't a given, if I miss a podcast episode, something bad is going on in my life because I really think this is one of the best uses of my time.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I want to underline a few things that you just mentioned. So, first of all, when we talk about just how you could use this as a one-to-many platform, we just had an episode with the current Deputy Secretary of the VA. And he talked about, he has to go show up in person. He goes to town halls, but he'll hear a question come up like repeatedly at different town halls. And then he says, wow, I should use that as part of my Glad You Asked YouTube series so that he can reach more people. And so I just want to kind of mention connecting that offline and online, because I'm hearing that from you too, is that, you're connecting with all these families, but you can't have a call with, 1,700 different families every week or month or even year. And so you can take some of those themes and you can create a one-to-many platform that people can connect, and then you become a magnet. They're finding you, they're finding that answer from you. They may watch the video, but never even reach out to you directly, but you're still helping them. So I think it just shows a type of influence. I also just want to say about the type of influence. When people think, well, why would you launch a podcast? Who do you have to influence? And we kind of started off the conversation with who do you have to influence to achieve impact? Well, your board's come on board with this, obviously. So, we got that group, but you have these industry partners. You're going in their office, and investor relations is listening to your podcast. And it's really helping to show them what the patients are saying and what the patients care about, the families care about. So you're influencing lots of different stakeholders through this mechanism. And I think that that's like a really important thing for people to hear. And then I want to talk about what you said about trust and credibility and the importance of that. And you alluded to this story, but I remember when we met before, you talked a little bit about some, maybe nervousness is the right word, of going to connect with a family and feeling like maybe you wouldn't have a lot in common. And then because of how you show up and because of how you communicate in your video podcast, the family saying, that they really felt like they know you. Talk about that a little bit more, because I think hearing ways that just practical ways that you've earned trust and built credibility from folks is something that any leader can take away from your approach.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for the glad you asked verbiage, because I'm going to do that, because that is exactly what happens. Like if I hear a question 3 times, I'm like, we got to put this in the podcast because I'm already tired of answering these. So the story you're talking about is when your disease is named after a gene, everyone has a specific mutation that causes that disease. And my son has a very weird mutation. And when families come to the community, we ask them to share their mutation, because that can inform a lot of understanding about their disease and how it's going to go. And so most of those, I get to see them as we collect that information. And I was flipping through one day and I saw a mutation that was identical. I was like, turning the pages and I, wait, what was that? And I see my son's mutation, but on another kid. And I'm like, where is this kid? And they're in the Central Valley of California, which is not far from where I live. Well, a couple hours. And I was like, I got to meet this family, because those kids were 18 and my kid was probably 7 or 8 back then. And I said, what is my son going to look like in 10 years? Right? That's the immediate logical question. And I'd never met another kid with Tony's mutation. So I call this family up and I say, hey, I would love to meet you. Can I come out? And they say, yeah, please, you're welcome. And I drive out and I show up. I'm like I'm who I am, right? I just show up. I got, I pull up in my car and I get out of my car and I'm all dressed up because I just been in another meeting, and I'm at a house that is in the Central Valley of California, and it was immediately obvious that I was going to have not a lot of common ground with this family, right? It's a nice way of putting it. And I was like, oh my God, I hope I don't come off as like I hope I really have so many questions for this family. I want to meet their kid. I want to understand what they're doing. I hope that the obvious differences between our lives don't create gaps. And I walked, and they very kind family. They welcomed me into their home, and I walked in and I meet the mom. She's very sweet. And the dad comes in and I'm like, all right, this has to go well. And he just gives me this hug. And that was where the I feel like I know you line comes from. And he's like, I have watched all your podcasts. This guy travels a lot for work, and he just tunes in. And I was like, oh, in that moment. And then it was great. We had a great conversation. I learned about their girls. I told them about Tony. And we're still very close, right? That family still comes to events, and I still keep tabs on them and make sure they're doing well. So it's a powerful tool. And I mean, if any, I think this applies to a lot of communities. You would have better perspective on that than I would. But when you are a small army trying to influence a huge and disparate population, what I always tell people is start a podcast, right? This is such a potent tool for amplifying your voice at this time. And even though there's so much noise out there, we're all have these little niches, and rare disease is about as niche as it gets. And you got to find people all over the world, and actually better, you got to have them find you. I don't have the energy to find them all. People find us now. And that's the other power of the pod, right? You post to your whatever platform, and that distributes to Apple, to Google, to Spotify, to Amazon Music, to whatever else. And then the signal just continues to amplify. And when people search for you or SYNGAP1 or your disease or your issue, boom, you pop up.
Yeah.
It's really powerful.
So I think there's somebody, every time you say something, I'm like, there's like literally 3 lessons we can extract from that one story. But
Yeah.
the authenticity that you have, the connection, one of the things about your style is a podcast can be like a scripted sort of, and there's, we love those sort of produced. I mean, I love those like NPR style, This is American Life. But then there's also like hey, I'm just going to talk to you. I'm going to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of your approach. It's, yeah, I'd say unpolished, right? It's not that it's not high quality, but it doesn't feel like you overly prepared. It makes it very accessible. And I think hearing that dad come up and give you a hug and say that sort of shows how your approach helps people who don't know you feel like they know you so that you can break
Right.
through. And I think there's a real lesson there for leaders about how we prepare to create content, how we do storytelling, whatever language that we want to use, and maybe some lessons that some of us need to unlearn. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your approach to that and just sort of your thinking on that sort of polished versus unpolished communication and just what you've learned from people's reaction to how you do it.
Yeah. I mean, I like I said before, I iterate a lot, right? So I've iterated with, I think in the early years, I just got up there and talked
Yeah.
because I was just working around the clock and I was like, "Brrr," and then I would write my notes. And then I got really long. And then I started writing the notes beforehand because writing the notes after was crazy making. So now I write the notes and then I try to speak to the notes, which I'm constraining myself a little bit, but the notes are just like bullet points, right? Like
Yeah.
what you see on my show notes is what I'm reading.
You're using
Right, so
those
it's
as
bullet,
like your
bullet,
talking
bullet.
point because you don't
Here's
sound
my
to me,
templates.
I've checked
No.
out several episodes, you're not reading a script.
I'm not reading a script.
That comes across.
I'm like,
You would not, if you read a script, I would say, wow, you should win an Oscar because it's not, you don't come across as reading a script, but you have a message that you want to convey. It's not that,
or I should get a new writer, right?
Yeah.
But I think that you were kind in the way you described it. And what I say to people, my own words, is this is a low to no production value podcast. Literally, like I type up my bullet points. I sit in front of this computer, and I talk for 10 minutes, and I'm staring at that little timer. And at 9:58, I wrap it up.
Yeah.
And it's and I do think that I'm just keeping it real. I'm not trying to create distance from my audience, right? I'm trying to make sure people understand that there's a real person fighting like hell for their kids and we're on the same team. And I need them to give me donations. I need them to give me literally their blood. I want their blood and their kids' blood. And I want their time too. I want them to volunteer for me. I want them to give biosamples. I want them to donate. Like they have to understand that we're real people doing real hard work over here. And if I thought that I would impress more people or raise more money by having a super polished podcast, I would probably invest in that. But I don't see the value. Like this is really about trust and credibility while sharing precious information that I don't know how to share faster. In the early years, I spent so many hours writing these really thoughtful blogs that nobody read them. Nobody has time for this stuff anymore. And it's really, I find this is, at the end of the day, this is how humans have engaged face to face, looking at each other, deciding if they can trust and work with each other.
Yeah.
Well before there was the internet, and it's going to be true well after all the tech comes and goes, right? This is how humans interact.
And I want to hit on something else that you said earlier that I think is really important. You don't have time or the ability to go find everyone. You've created a platform that makes it easy for them to find you. And obviously, in the case of SYNGAP1, there's a small universe of people who know what this is and care about it. But the people who do, I mean, they search for it, like you're going to pop up. That's maybe one of the advantages when you have a rare disease is that, it's something that like, that's not getting confused with a lot of other things on Google. But you have created this platform where these families and researchers and, industry folks from all over the place, because of the platform you've built and because you're on so many platforms, folks can find you on YouTube, that this comes through. And I wanted you to just share a little bit more about that because I think there's a special type of influence that allows you to be a magnet and pull people in the way that you have.
So what's nice about SYNGAP1 is, unfortunately, no one else is fighting me for the space. So, I mean, there's a few random podcasts out there from other people who've talked about their kid, and there's this, that, and the other thing. But certainly one of my goals is that when a newly diagnosed parent gets in the car at the hospital 2 hours from their house, and they sit down and they can't even remember the meeting they just had, and all they know is SYNGAP1. When they type SYNGAP1 into Google, like any listener right now, go ahead and take out your phone, type SYNGAP1 into search, hit search. Hopefully, like half your screen is either Cure SYNGAP1 or this podcast, right? Like that's the goal, is so we catch people. And that's really, really important. So if you want to own a topic or a disease or a gene, you got to flood the space. You got to put a ton of content out there, and the internet rewards regularity too, right? So by being semi-regular, I'm not perfect, but every week I try to put it out there, and I try to be current, and I try to link to things.
5 years.
The internet respects that and gives it to you. And I want to point out one other thing. It's true for rare, and it might be true for other areas. I'm sure it is. I have families who are like, "Oh my God, help me," and they call us and they work with us and they talk to us. And I have families who reach out to us. And then I have families who, because they're struggling with despair, because there's cultural reasons, they don't want to talk about a genetic issue in their family, even though when I say genetic, it's not hereditary, right? This is a spontaneous mutation. It's not in their family. They don't want to reach out. There's cultural reasons, there's personal hesitation, there's depression, whatever it is, where they don't want to connect, but they are desperate to know what's going on. So there's the people I know about, and then there's the people I don't know about who are watching intently. And what I understand that they don't yet is their kids are going to get bigger and harder, and they're going to need help. So they're going to eventually reach out to us. But I'm happy for them to get to know us and understand that we're serious and credible, and maybe they'll reach out to us sooner, because then we're going to help each other. And so I think your question was about being a magnet, and I think we achieve that by consistently flooding the space, making sure we are out there, we're seen, and in these pods.
Yeah.
Some of these pods just take a life of their own. But also I'm very conscious of all the people who are, the families who are watching but not contacting us, the companies who are in early stage and working on our disease, but they don't want to tell us yet. There's a lot of people who want to know what you're doing, but don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
And having a podcast like this gives them the chance to feel that connection with you.
Yeah. And, a lesson I'm remembering from one of our past chief influencers, Yasmin Arrington, she was named one of the CNN heroes for a nonprofit that she founded called Scholarships. And she said, you never know who's watching. And she told a story about how she had connected with somebody and applied for something, and then they watched her on social media. And then when she got contacted by CNN, they're like, we've been watching. And she's just like, I had no idea. And so you never know who's watching. You never know who's listening. Right. Sometimes they reach out to you, but sometimes they don't. And it makes an impact. And, you'll find out about some of them as time goes on, as you have. But it's one of the ways you build community. And your community is not a huge community, but it's famously an activated community. I mean, when you ask families to take action, they do it. They show up. How do you move people from that place of, despair and focusing on their own needs, which is a really real thing for your families, to awareness and then to action? You've done it so effectively. What has been your secret to doing that?
So in the Peace Corps, I was a high school math teacher. And I think one of the things you finally learn as a high school math teacher is people need to hear things like at least 3 times before they do it, even if it's the simplest stuff. And so some of my podcasts are pretty darn repetitive. And I think, for instance, like natural history studies, why should we do them? Like, I beat this horse to death, but I think I'm always explaining, if you do this, then this happens. So cause and effect. But the other thing is, if I announce a study, a citizen, when I started, we had 20 people. If you listen to the last episode I dropped, 204, I said we have 279 people in Citizen, and I don't know why that number is not 300. Right? I'm always giving people numbers, so that so then the parents are out there who aren't in Citizen are like, wow, what do those 279 people have that I don't? And so it's a little bit of just basic human psychology, right? Like you're missing out, FOMO, and this is why you should do this. You want to be included in this. And it's what's important to understand about rare disease and SYNGAP and probably what everyone else is working on. Things are happening really, really fast. And what's great about this is because I have a staff of about 4 people and a lot of volunteers. So I hear things. I hear when families had confusions, people got upset about something, people didn't understand what something meant, whatever. And that trickles up to me. And I'm able to be like, wow, okay, if I've heard about this parent not understanding why we're doing this, there's at least another 50 out there.
Yeah.
And so if I can clarify that point in the next pod, I can nip these cycles in the bud.
Yeah.
And I think the trouble is when you let and I'm the executive, right? Like if I hopefully, if I say something needs to happen, it happens. So, what I'm doing is I'm trying to create a circuit where as soon as I hear things, I get the information to the community. I can course correct things that have gone off and I can encourage things that are going well. And that really, really works. There's always the usual suspects. There's like 5 people I can tell you when my podcast comes out, they listen to it, they call me, they comment. I love these people. But there's also people I've like not talked to for a year and they're like, hey, I listened to this and I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Right. So it's just incessant it's connecting the dots. It's explaining, it's sharing the counts and the numbers and constantly urging people to move forward.
Yeah.
And that's what I do. And hopefully I don't know if we're doing enough for the families who are stuck in despair. But what we choose to focus on is working with the families who are motivated and trying to make progress. So there's a door for all of us to walk through.
Yeah. And you said something in passing that I'm sure other listeners kind of went, that surprises me, which is, you got like 4 people on your team. But when you look at your organization, it feels so much bigger than just your, employee headcount. And even when you look at the website, you have really featured so many other stakeholders and folks who are involved that you get the sense, because you think rare disease, it doesn't affect that many people. You get a sense there's like a lot more to this. And it feels to me like you've been very intentional about things to punch above your weight. We've heard about consistent communication. I've seen on the website how you make like your volunteers and others so visible, being so, religiously consistent about the way you show up and get your message out on platforms like YouTube and give that insider information and your podcast, et cetera. So say a little bit more about, especially because of your background in business, that what you've learned about how to punch above your weight as a small organization, but make a much larger impact. We've had a few other episodes where we've had that as a theme. One of my favorites was the ambassador from Liechtenstein, smallest embassy team in Washington, and they kind of punch above their weight too. So say more about that.
Yeah, it's weird. It's something I'm still learning about how we're doing it. I mean, on the headcount thing, we've raised millions of dollars, about $1 million a year is what we end up committing to science. And I could talk for a lot of time about how we make sure that money is catalytic and is leveraged. We don't just throw money at the usual things. We try to seed things that will lead to more work elsewhere. But if the goal is to fund science and to fund research and to create and to facilitate the creation of medicines, then you don't want to spend too much on headcount. It's simple, right? People cost money. And I am very fortunate that I have 4 parents. Actually, they're all moms. There's me and 4 moms. And well, it's 3 moms and a sister, actually. But these incredible women work for SYNGAP, Cure SYNGAP1, and they all are underpaid. I mean, it's a terrible place to work. You're underpaid and you have to work for me. But they all work tirelessly because they're in it. They're all related to a SYNGAPian and they're all desperate to see us succeed. And then on top of that, I have a board of 14 families and I have a different committees led by volunteers, people who have day jobs, but want to do what they can. And just by constant organization and again, the communication of the pod, right? The pod is part of me activating the whole team and saying, this helps. So that the part of punching above our weight is leveraging the volunteers and being really judicious with how we spend our time. Part of punching above our weight is how we give grants. As you mentioned, like in my past career, I've worked for the Gates Foundation and Emerson Collective. I've given grants before. It's harder than it sounds. And I do think I have some skill there. hopefully. And then the other part of punching above our weight is I think this pod, honestly, like, we are so visible. I know a lot of rare disease groups, sometimes are just struggling to do one or two things. And I do think Cure SYNGAP1 should be proud of itself. We get a lot done, but we let people know what we're doing. And I think the trouble is some of my peers in rare disease are so busy toiling away at something, but not telling others what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, start a pod. And as an example of how our influence and our presence has helped, I mean, Camp 4 Therapeutics is a company who is working on a medicine for Cure SYNGAP1 right now. And they were doing a capital raise. Phase 1-2 trials for rare diseases cost a lot of money. And they were stuck at a point, and they called us and they were like, would you invest $1 million in this private placement? And we have $1 million because we commit millions of dollars every year, and it takes time for that money to go out the door. So I said, okay, but you need this much and you have this much. $1 million isn't going to change the future, guys. And they're like, yeah, but if we got $1 million investment from Cure SYNGAP1, our investors would believe what we're telling them, which is we have a good relationship with Cure SYNGAP1, and you're going to make sure we fill trials. Back to that trust and credibility, right? And these investors had watched the pod. And I was like, all right, if you think it'll help, that's why we exist, right? So I go to the board, convince the board we should invest $1 million, call them up. I say, hey, here's $1 million. We're in for $1 million. They called me back 2 weeks later and said, hey, we raised $100 million.
Wow.
So your $1 million, before that, they were at some other 8-digit number. I don't remember the numbers, but the $100 million number is public. And so they had investors at a certain point. We put in $1 million. They were able to go back to investors and be like, look, we are working hand in glove with the patients.
Yeah.
Check out the patients, watch the pod. More investors came in, and then more investors came in on that. Now they have $100 million. And that's $100 million is not like, yay, $100 million is enough to get us through phase 1-2 and to make the necessary investments to get this trial to work. So that's an example of building up the need for rare disease groups, I think, to build up a public persona, because that's probably the best $1 million we've ever spent.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, what you said there that kind of ties back to is you see people just toiling away doing the work. And obviously the work is so important, but not telling people that they're doing the work.
Right.
And there's just this power in getting the message out, not just to pump yourself up, but to help people. Part of what you do with your podcast is, you're educating and you're helping all of these folks. That gave you the visibility to have that opportunity to be part of that. And it really shows the role that patient advocacy can play in accelerating breakthroughs. We're seeing the role of patient advocacy shift. I've had several patient advocacy leaders on Chief Influencer, and we've learned about venture philanthropy, and we've learned about, some of the other things that are happening in the space that make such an impact. And I love hearing that example because we hadn't talked about it before, going from that $1 million that you all brought to the table, and then they were able to raise $100 million, which, again, in this space is obviously, there's still a lot more work to be done, but that's pretty good. I mean, that's pretty impressive. 4-person organization or 5-person organization helping to make that happen. I mean, that's incredible. As we kind of, come to a close, I could keep talking to you all day, Mike. I just love this. But just for leaders who are listening and they're trying to change something that feels impossibly complex, policy, healthcare, culture, what's a lesson in influence that you wish you had learned sooner?
That's a solid question. I think it's back to your question about being unpolished. I think when I started, when other rare disease leaders started, we struggle with imposter syndrome, and we struggle with, am I doing this right? Right? Is this thing on? And at the end of the day, if you're in that seat because you're a leader of an organization or because you're a rare disease parent who's decided to start something, you don't have time. Your mission doesn't have time for you to apologize and wallow in imposter syndrome. I give a talk to rare disease leaders every year, and that's one of my first slides. Like, you just have to get out there and say, all right, this is what we're doing. This is what I'm doing. You have to be willing to be wrong. You have to be willing to be made fun of. You have to be willing to get hard feedback. But if you're not willing to stand up and use your voice and share your plan, you can't honestly expect people to follow you, right? So I expect people to do what I say. that sounds terrible. I expect people to get on board and do everything they can to drive for a cure for SYNGAP1. And that's what I'm telling them to do. But I can't really do that unless I'm willing to every week say, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. Right. And it's just, you got to unapologetically, so the answer to your question is you got to unapologetically use your voice and be willing to engage with the people you're trying to lead. It's not sufficient to just issue edicts and say, go.
Yeah. I think that's such a great place to end the conversation today. When I think about some of the takeaways, not just that we discussed about, but just what I've observed looking into Cure SYNGAP1 and looking into you, Mike, I think there's some things that are themes that any leader in any space, whether they're rare disease or someplace else, can take away. One is just the power of your own voice, which you mentioned. And that means showing up authentically. What's real for you? And there's some experimentation there. We heard that from you, trying different things. I like that specific, tangible example you gave, that you used to just go off the cuff and write your notes, and you realize writing those notes first and then using those as a guide so that you're still unscripted, but you have that direction. I think that's a really good piece of advice that any leader could use if they're trying to create content right there. It's a way that you bring your authentic voice forward, but that you do it in a way that's not overly polished, right? It's not that it's unprofessional, it's not overly polished. The other thing, though, that I take away from you is this idea that we have to communicate relentlessly. We have to repeat ourselves. One of our past chief influencers said, as CEO, he's the chief reminding officer, Alex Worth from Quorum. And it was like, yeah, that's actually a good point. You have to tell people what you're going to tell them. They're going to tell them the thing. And then you got to tell them again what you told them. And you have to continue to repeat because folks have short attention spans. If they're listening to a podcast, they may be multitasking. They're doing the dishes or something. They're driving. And it's not like they're going to remember every single word. So you do have to repeat those things. And I like how you gave an example of how you repeat it, but not in the same way, talking about the target of the folks who are, sharing their personal information, their genetic information to be part of these studies, and how it's like, hey, we're at 30 and now we're at 270, but why aren't we at 300? And so you're repeating, you're reminding, but you're doing it in a way toward a goal that gets folks motivated. And by doing that over and over, you have built a community with people, some of whom you've met, some of whom you haven't, but you've also become a magnet and you've pulled people in. They find you. They look for SYNGAP. They get that diagnosis in the family, and immediately your organization and your podcast is showing up. And now they have a friend who they've never met, who's a guide, who's giving them that information. And I think that's a really great way for a leader to show up as a chief influencer, to be that fierce advocate, to be that wise friend, to be that guide who can help them along the way. And I just really admire how you do that, how you've built that up over the last 5 years with everything else going on in your life, and you've kept that going on and on. And I think there's some wonderful lessons for our listeners about how to influence through relentless communication, through that authenticity, and just, punching above your weight through those tactics. So, Mike, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Anthony.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.